every universe potentially has multiple dimensions, and we're living in a multiverse. So we know that the universe is most likely the shadow of a higher dimension. It's crazy stuff.
Anything that appears 3D on a computer screen is actually 2D. And because we exist in the third dimension, we have the unique ability to perceive and interpret 2D representations as three-dimensional.
So if you draw a line on a piece of paper, that's the first dimension. If you then connect those lines and create a house on a piece of paper, that's a two-dimensional structure, or you can move that into a computer. Anything you see in a computer that looks 3D is actually 2D, right? So, and because we're in the third, we can see down into 2D, we can see all the way down, obviously, into 1D, and we can manipulate those dimensions from our higher selves.
Beings in higher dimensions perceive the past, present, and future simultaneously, challenging our linear understanding of time and existence.
Now, now there are beings in fourth, fifth, and sixth dimensions. There's people above us. Now, because of that, they see us and they recognize the past, present, and future operating all at the same time. Everything's happening at once.
Right.
There is no separation between the past, present, and the future. The arrow doesn't exist. Because they're higher than us, they can look down into the third and they can see into what we're doing.
Time, as we perceive it, doesn't truly exist. Only clocks do. Does this mean our concept of time is merely an artificial construct?
Well, people in the third dimension, we're in the third dimension, what we tend to not understand is that time really doesn't exist. Clocks exist. Time doesn't exist.
Right.
And like you said, we've been given this functional arrow of time, which puts us in one specific direction so that we can organize our thoughts and our days and our years and weeks and what we're going to do and where we're going to meet up with somebody and everything else.
Time is but an illusion, a tool at our disposal, challenging our conventional perceptions and inviting us to redefine its role in our lives.
So we have this ability to coordinate and collaborate with each other, like how we're here today at this specific time. However, if you understand that time is also an illusion, it's something that you can use as a tool, but if you also understand that it's an illusion, then you can actually master time and you can maximize what you're doing on this planet.
The fourth dimension, casting its darkness, shapes the very realm we inhabit, challenging our perception of reality.
The fourth dimension is something called a tesseract. And if you go into the ancient text, it's Metatron's cube. Meta, M-E-T-A, meta. Obviously, you know,
meta.
The metaverse, right? They got that from Metatron's cube. It's a fourth dimensional substructure. Now, this fourth dimension is really something called a quasi-crystal. And this quasi-crystal in the fourth dimension, it casts a shadow. And the shadow that it casts, it creates the realm that we're living in here. We're living in a shadow of a higher dimension. That shadow creates a third dimension. It actually creates a fractal of it, creates this fractal holographic matrix that we're actually maneuvering in the third dimension right now. You can address a fourth dimension of time like Albert Einstein was saying if you're just looking at a third plus a fourth being the arrow. But when you actually move up into another dimension, we now know in quantum physics that there is actually a fourth dimension. So all dimensions are in 90-degree angles of each other. And according to quantum theory right now, we're really anticipating that there's at least 11 dimensions, or otherwise the universe would collapse. So there really is truly a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way up. Not just the arrow of time. That's just something extra. They try to make it make sense back then by saying the fourth dimension is time, but time is actually not a dimension at all. I believe personally, just based off of my research, and I've gone through now over 1,000 scriptures, texts, papyruses, cuneiform tablets from all over the world. They all have a very similar story. And all these ancient civilizations talk about beings, not just beings who came here from other planets, people that look like us and we look like them. We're, in other words, not identical, but very similar. In other words, a bilateral, bipedal hominid of some type that can maneuver around, that has appendages that can manipulate the environment, because without that, you can't move out into space and other places. And they also talk about multidimensional. You get into like the Nag Hammadi, stuff like that. You're talking about multidimensional beings. And so in physics, in quantum physics in particular, they started theorizing on these dimensions and were able to even analyze and discover some that they actually do exist. And on top of that, they realized that the dimensions are packed so tight on top of one another that if you can phase shift your atomic structure, your subatomic frequency, you can walk right into another dimension. And so they started postulating, what if beings from higher dimensions or some of these apparitions and these paranormal phenomena that we're seeing, are they able to maybe take a glimpse or a peek? Are they phasing through into our universe? And so from higher dimensions. And so they started really theorizing it. It seems to be, and based on my research, that there's people living everywhere. Not just, and I'm not talking about little green men with antenna. I think that there's people living all throughout this universe in the third dimension. And I think there's people living all throughout even higher multiple dimensions, maybe at a certain level, a certain height in those dimensions. Maybe they don't have a real corporeal body.
Right, non-physical.
Non-physical, you know what I'm saying? But I believe that the consciousness is there.
We are all composed of pure light, revealing that everything within the third dimension is fundamentally a manifestation of light.
Well, one thing people don't understand is that we are all made of actual light. Well, everything in the third dimension is made of light.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are light and light is us. Mm-hmm. We know that the illusion of this avatar body and this chair I'm sitting on and the table that you're sitting at, the illusion of it's there. But what is this? This is slowed down light waves. Mm-hmm. When you slow light down and then consciousness interacts with it, it collapses it, what we call solid matter. Mm. So solid matter is actually an illusion.
Right.
For example, the only thing stopping my hand from going through this chair is the repulsion of the electromagnetic frequencies. I don't actually touch the chair. We don't touch anything.
Yeah.
And so if I can phase shift the atomic frequency of my hand to match the same frequency of the atoms in this chair, I pass my hand right through it because atoms are 99.999% empty space.
Right. Like pouring liquid into liquid.
Exactly. You know, that's why when galaxies merge together, like we're merging with a galaxy right now called Sagittarius, you don't see any real collisions happening or anything around us.
That's my Sagittarius out there.
Yeah. Because, you know, galaxies are mostly empty space, just like atoms. Everything's a fractal. So we are light beings, and also because of that, we're a fractal. We have consciousness, which is also light. And
what is a fractal?
A fractal is when you take, for example, if you look at a hologram, and you go to one part of the hologram, one tiny piece, and look at it, you'll see the entire image in that smallest piece. Okay, the only thing you lose is a little bit of resolution. Okay. And so it's important for people to understand that this entire realm is a fractal of a whole. In other words, as above, so below.
So if you look at an atom, it gives you the whole thing.
It gives you the whole thing, absolutely.
So human beings, would you consider a fractal of the universe?
We're a fractal of the universe. And our consciousness, even though it's one consciousness, it's also a fractal of main master consciousness. And it's really incredible that every thought that you think in your skull, it leaves your skull as a form of a light wave.
Billy Carson assumes that there are multidimensional beings that are in higher dimensions that know how to match their subatomic frequency to our particular dimension.
I think we have under the ocean that there's people living here that have been here for a very long time. I believe that they have their own breakaway civilization. The oceans are pretty much mostly undisturbed, and they're there. I think you also have multidimensionals. Beings that are in higher dimensions or other dimensions that know how to match their subatomic frequency to our particular dimension, and they can walk right in or fly right in or come right in some type of way. And then also I believe that you have beings that are light years away that can travel here. And I don't think that they're using typical space travel. They're probably using something like a warp drive, where in a warp drive, what really happens is you actually shrink space in front of the ship and you expand it from the back. And I was able to understand a lot of this stuff. And so I dug real deep into it, and I got to the understanding that we're living in a multi-dimensional universe, and there's at least 11 dimensions. Otherwise, the universe would collapse. Each dimension is a 90-degree angle right above the next one, compactified. So they're sitting right on top of us. So within less than a Planck unit of space above you, there's another dimension that actually exists with a whole nother universe happening simultaneously while we're sitting right here. And from higher dimensions, they experience time differently. Time really doesn't exist. The past, present, and the future happen all at once. So somebody, for example, from the fifth dimension would look at us and they'd be able to see us. Imagine us in this building here, but imagine when I first walked in, and imagine us in here, and imagine me like in the bathroom or something. They'd be able to see us in all the different rooms. The different rooms would represent different time frames of existence within this structure. So they could see the past, present, and future at the same time. So it's pretty cool. Weird stuff starts happening the higher the dimensions you go.
So is the idea that when you're in a higher dimension, you can see below lower dimensions, but you can't see dimensions above you?
Exactly, unless you have the capability of matching. First, you have to obtain the frequency of a higher dimension and then match that frequency to be able to walk in. So
match the frequency.
Yeah. So for example, okay, my hand is stopped now by this table, right? Why is it stopped? I'm not really touching the table. There's repulsion going on. Electromagnetic repulsion between the electrons in my hand is repelling the electrons in the table. You don't really touch anything. Now, if I can match the subatomic frequency of the atoms in this chunk of wood here on this table, with my hand, I'd be able to pass my hand right through this table unscathed. Why? Because atoms are 99.999% empty space. Nothing is really here. Everything is only a light wave slowed down to a particular frequency. And so if you can match frequencies, you can merge with things. You can walk through walls and all that kind of stuff. The things that seem paranormal could be advanced beings have tapped into some type of understanding of how to match different frequencies in our dimension and appear apparitional or paranormal, but in true reality, they could just be taking a peek in.
Scientists discovered that particles transphase in and out of existence, traveling to different dimensions. Does this challenge our understanding of reality? Are these particles hinting at hidden realms beyond our perception?
Quantum physics proves it. See, when we look into the quantum world, everything changed. In standard physics is where we are right now, on the large side of physics. But the smaller you go, the more weird things get. We find that particles transphase in and out of existence, and they go to different dimensions. We even know now that some of our synapses of our thoughts in our brain phase out of this dimension and they go somewhere else, and then they come back again. And this has all been tracked and traced through the understanding of quantum mechanics and quantum physics, and understanding that dimensions exist. The biggest way that we made a model of this is we figured out how to create something called quasi-crystals. Now, these quasi-crystals are these multi-dimensional crystals. We actually created an 8th dimensional quasi-crystal.
We created this.
Yes, we created.
How did we create it?
We created in a laboratory using different technologies. And then from that 8th dimensional quasi-crystal, it casts a shadow of itself down to a 4th dimensional quasi-crystal, which then casts down a shadow which creates a sphere. So we know that the universe is most likely the shadow of a higher dimension. It's crazy stuff. These are depicting the nature of reality.
Wow.
And they actually are mathematical programming codes. They're a special type of code, though. They're error correcting codes. The same type that Google browser is running on is the same thing that runs the universe.
Error correcting codes.
Yeah.
And what do we gain from all of this knowledge? Like, what does this tell us, and where do we take this? Like, what is obviously this is like foundational knowledge for us, but like, where do you see it going?
Well, if you understand that we're living in a fractal holographic light matrix, it doesn't mean we're not real. It just means that there is a creator or creators, that we're living in something that was created, just like the ancient texts and all the scribes and biblical texts and everything else says. But it tells us, wow, this is the method of the creation. Now we're getting closer to understanding what we really are. We understand now that consciousness isn't made inside this avatar body, that the avatar body doesn't even exist, that consciousness is a stream of something, coming from somewhere else, and is being picked up in this matrix with this coding. If you took all the humans on Earth, there's 8 billion humans on Earth. If I took all 8 billion humans and removed the empty space between their atoms, I can fit every human into a sugar cube. One sugar cube can hold all 8 billion of us.
The human brain doesn't create consciousness. It downloads it. Could this mean that our minds are merely receivers for a greater universal consciousness?
I believe that, based on my research and some of the research of others, is that the human brain doesn't create consciousness. It downloads it. And I believe there's a constant stream of consciousness coming into each and every sentient being and every soul that exists throughout the entire universe, even the multiverse. There's only one actual radio station that's broadcasting this frequency. I'm 99.1, you're 99.2, so forth and so on. And so we're picking up a point number of the frequency. So your avatar body is attuned to pick up .2 2. I'm dot 1, for example, right? Hypothetically. So I'm picking up a specific frequency that my body is attuned to allow my spirit energy, which is still yours, still together, but just slightly off frequency, to inhabit it. Now, why is this? I believe that the universe itself is imbued with divine energy that has split itself into Googles of entities so it can experience itself subjectively through many different life forms. Not even just life forms, but even as atoms in this microphone, because the atoms in this microphone have electrons, and those electrons make conscious decisions based on observation. So that means even the atoms in this microphone are conscious, which means that everything is actually conscious.
Our souls are here to experience this realm, gathering information and transmitting it back to the source, redefining our purpose and connection to the universe.
So this entire realm, to me, is a data collection proving ground where our souls are here to experience this realm, to collect information and send it back to the source. And if you look at the as above, so below aspect from the Hermetic principles, what we're talking about is look at your mind. Your mind is encased in complete darkness, your brain, right? Your brain is in complete darkness. It knows nothing, but it has friends. It's sensory perception system, tasting, hearing, touching, smelling, feeling, right? And so it says to its friends, hey, I need to understand what's going on outside. Can you collect some information? So the friends go out, they touch, they smell, they taste, they listen, they see. And what they do is they collect data. Now the friends, they can't understand the data they're collecting. They can collect the data, but they can only transmit an electromagnetic frequency via the nervous system back to the brain. The brain takes that data that's encoded on that nervous system and de-encodes it and actually projects a hologram as to what's going on outside. And then we navigate through this realm based on a holographic projection on collected data. Now you scaled it up from the micro to the macro. The universal consciousness may be doing the same exact thing. It may be utilizing us as portals to be able to collect information. What is it like to be Billy Carson? What is it like to travel an hour away from a hotel and sit and do a podcast to talk about contemplating what the universe is all about, you know, and all these incredible things? What it's like to travel to Egypt with you and experience the Great Pyramid and all these things and meditations and all these incredible things. And so it's like it's trying to collect information so that it can learn. Just like we're learning. It's the same thing, micro to macro, as above, so below. I believe that's exactly what's happening.
Billy Carson believes that God embodies an unparalleled reservoir of raw energy, limitless within this universe, beyond human comprehension.
I think that people, I'm glad you brought this up, because I think people keep, just through the programming code that we've been giving for so long, they believe that there's this God, like you say, this God that's a physical male energy that's got a white robe on and a magic wand. Bing, I'm going to allow you to win your game tonight. Or bing, I'm going to let you win the lottery. It's not really like that. I mean, you have people praying to win. I mean, there's no universal creator that's flying around through space going, you know what? I got to have these people win a break. Let me go back and ding. So I think that we have to understand that God really, what is God? What is the essence of God? Well, you look at the fact that the universe is a source of unlimited, untouched energy. Like every single Planck unit within space-time is an unparalleled amount of actual raw energy. I believe that is the source energy of the creator itself, and that we are to tap in, and that this energy, like anything else, is also a frequency. Now, that same energy that exists all around us on this energetic grid, if you believe, or, you know, are you a proponent of membrane theory or string theory, that same energy that is all around us is also inside of every atom inside of our body. And that also that energy is even in our spirit, which is in being beamed in and encapsulated in this avatar body temporally, while we, you know, navigate through this matrix for a period of time during the time that we're here to learn. And so it's really incredible to see that all these aspects really culminate and come together and show us that we are God and God is us. And that we have the ability to tap into the true power that's already inside of us. Instead of journeying into outer space, we need to journey to inner space. That's where the true answers are located. And that the power that's in us is so great and so grand. It's the same exact power that created everything we see in the known universe. And I think that we've cut ourselves short in thinking that we don't have any power, that we're useless, that we're hopeless, that we have to beg an outside source and not understanding that we can go inside and we can command our realities. We can become ordainers of our own destiny.
We might be the pioneers of this simulation, far removed from base reality, challenging the very essence of our existence.
We wouldn't really be able to know. But when I just see that we've already gone and started creating our own simulated universes, I have to say, how many times this has happened? Could it be, what are the odds that we're the very, 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 very first ones to be in this simulation? It just, to me, seems like, we may not be close to base reality, man. I mean, the odds are so small. You have a better chance of winning like 5 mega lottos or whatever they call those things, right? So I think that base reality is these nested realities, and the one obviously maybe at the very top or at the very bottom, depending on which direction you're looking, could be the very first one. And then at some point, that civilization or civilizations within that universe become sophisticated enough to try to duplicate what they're living in some medium. And for us, it's digital. We're creating a digital reality, which is what now is flourishing, and AI and everything else is in there. I think eventually it'll get to the point where we can even inject ourselves into that artificial realm. Now, right now with VR and AR, we can kind of do it, but I think there'll be this almost like an avatar experience where we really are transferring our consciousness, symbiotic linking to the reality of that realm and experiencing it as if we're really there. Not like we're, here, kind of walking around and bumping into walls with these funny glasses, but actually being in the full simulation, kind of like, quote unquote, God descending from the heaven into, into reality. And maybe they will think we're gods in there,
How does this tie in with our understanding of multiple dimensions and parallel universes? Well,
the multiple dimensions exist within this one universe. So this universe has, according to theoretical physicists like Michio Kaku, 11 dimensions. Now, what's interesting about that, I have been talking about that for a long time. I also talked about the hypothesis that the human mind connects to 11 dimensions about 8-10 years ago. And then just 3 years ago, the Brain Institute came out and said the human mind is connecting to 11 dimensions.
Consciously shaping connections across every dimension, we transcend the boundaries of perception and existence, challenging the very fabric of reality.
So it's just like the chakra, I mean, it's chart. It's just going straight up. We're connecting in every single dimension consciously. And so we have that. So our universe is multidimensional. And every thought that we create in our minds to even build something like this microphone starts off in the multidimensional platform. First, somebody sits down and they think about what would a microphone be able to do? Now that's floating around in higher dimensional thinking. And then you collapse that into 2 dimensions by drawing it on a piece of paper or putting it into a CAD design, computer assisted design. That's still 2D, even though it looks 3D. And then you transfer that information to an engineer who then manifests it into 3-dimensional reality that you can touch and move around on the XYZ axis in space-time in the 3rd dimension. So every single thing that exists in the entire 3rd dimension was manifested from the higher dimensional thought and collapsed into reality, 2D, then into 3D. Now, on a multidimensional scale, every universe potentially has multiple dimensions, and we're living in a multiverse. So there are all these universes moving around in this huge soup, maybe even colliding with one another, creating a white hole, which then sucks energy out of a other universe and sends it into a brand new creation of another universe. So it could be that even the friction of bumping together creates more universes. Black holes lead to white holes and so forth and so on. It can get so crazy, but I do believe that there's this alternate reality or alternate timeline. So now we have a whole other thing that, the reason why they talk about the grandfather paradox, if we were able to go back in time, if we killed our grandfather, how did we go back in time to kill him? I think that's because if you go back in time to kill your grandfather and the grandfather paradox hypothesis experiment, what happens is when you go back in time, you're not on your timeline anymore. You've already shifted into a totally different timeline in the same universe. So there's multiple timelines within universes. This thing goes crazy. So you can just keep going and going. There's so many possibilities, so many potential outcomes when everything exists all at once from higher dimensions, past, present, and future.
Billy Carson asserts that the 3rd dimension is fundamentally a learning ground, challenging us to rethink our purpose and existence in this realm.
I believe that the 3rd dimension is really a place for us to learn. I think that we're definitely connected to our higher selves here, and our higher selves are probably living in true reality wherever that's located, but that here, it's all about the mission. And what is the mission? Not only collecting data, but also learning from experiences. How long will it take a civilization in this sector of this particular galaxy, in this universe, to become awakened enough to sustain a golden age? We've seen the rise and fall of golden ages. How many of these galaxies can achieve a golden age and actually sustain it without falling again? How many of these people can get to a certain point where they've achieved a certain level of wisdom and consciousness that can transmute even multi-dimensions, becoming an adept initiate and all these ascended masters and so forth? And I think this is a grand experiment. So when you look at it, it's like, wow, being born again, for example, right? A lot of people think that's when you go and you're giving yourself to the Lord and you're getting baptized and all of that. But I really believe that it's about being here in this third dimension and figuring out what you did wrong and understanding where you made your mistakes, looking at those mistakes, analyzing them, learning from them, and learning how not to repeat those mistakes so you can become a better person. And every day our goal is to become a better person a little bit at a time, every single day, trying to work towards perfection. Not that we can become absolutely perfect, maybe it's a possibility, but working towards that goal. But you'll see over time, those little tiny pieces of effort every single day, when you look back, you'll be able to say, wow, look where I came from a year ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, whatever it was. You can realize that I've grown consciously since then. I've been born again through my own spirit. I've actually learned from past mistakes. I've realized them. I've created changes in my life to make myself a better person, and I'm moving forward. And I believe that's the path that we're on. How long can it take before a certain number of people are able to realize this and move towards those different levels? I believe when a certain amount of people get to that level, it's going to spark a sustained golden age, which is the ultimate goal. I believe that is the ultimate test of the third dimension.
And when you look over the whole history of U.S. military encounters with UFOs, and say UFOs here, they're not doing a whole lot of mitigation of those things.
He has a talent for synthesizing vast amounts of information into coherent narratives that highlight the significance of UFO phenomena in the context of national security and global politics.
According to the woman, they walk into the woods with the guy. He turns, he walks into the woods with them. And that's the end of her story. That was the whole thing. So it's a crazy thing. It's like, who are these people?
Following the success of his first book, Dolan published UFOs and the National Security State, The Cover-Up Exposed, 1973, 1991.
I have no confirmed knowledge. I heard someone telling me that some crazy stuff is going to happen later this year in 2024. I don't know, maybe it will.
Through his scholarly work, public speaking, and media appearances, Dolan continues to promote a more serious and informed dialogue about the potential existence of extraterrestrial life and its implications for humanity.
I swear to you, this is what she said to me. So there's a man standing at the edge of the woods. She said, do you remember the character Lurch from the Addams Family TV show? Tall, black suit. She said he looked kind of like that guy. She looked like Lurch. Very tall, and it intimidated her. It frightened her.
And where did this person appear from?
From the edge of the woods. He was waiting for this couple that was walking to him. The couple that was in church. They're walking across the field toward this guy. They will use propaganda to do that. They will absolutely do everything possible to influence that culture to the maximum extent they can, and very frequently are quite successful. In my current study of over 600 USO cases that I've collected and gone into, and that I will be publishing later this year, about 6% of them involve either a case of missing time for the witness or a sighting of beings operating craft. It's good that we're having a public discussion about UFOs or UAPs to some extent, but my take is that all of these conversations are they're tip of iceberg types of discussions. Like there's so much of an enormous reality behind all of these conversations that is still never discussed. that is vastly greater profundity than anything that is really being discussed in the public realm. And it really makes me wonder, are we ever going to get to the real depths of the UFO reality, the ET alien reality, if we can call it that? And I just have this sense that we're really not going to get there for a very long time, if ever. He got into the whole thing about meaningless words, which is just as relevant today as back then. Terms like democracy, he said, freedom, justice. He says people use these without any kind of precise definitions. You don't know what they're really talking about, except that it's obvious that when politicians use these, they are attempting to exploit popular emotions and without really committing their own agenda or telling people what their own specific actions usually are. But freedom, democracy, I mean, that's just as, those words are just as abused today as they were back then. If you are using power to propagandize and to control others, you are less and less likely to use clear language. You're going to be obligated to use language that is obfuscatory and that is unclear and that is deceptive, essentially, is what that is. And, you know, Orwell's basic rule of clear communication is that when you write a sentence, he said, you have to be able to see it in your eyes, in your mind's eye. He talked about the use of, back in his day, the word visage, which was a fancy word for face. He said, why use visage when you can use face? You know, in other words, use language that people can actually relate to, and that when you speak a phrase, people are more likely to be able to actually see it in their mind. That's good when language can do that. It will convey truth. When you feel like someone gives you a long sentence and you can't really figure out what's going on, he says, be suspicious, because something is going on there that in all likelihood is not going to be to your benefit. Remember, post 9/11, government talked about enhanced interrogation techniques instead of using the word torture. All kinds of collateral damage, referring to civilian deaths in military operations. The whole phrase "war on terror" is totally Orwellian, justifying invasive surveillance measures for the war on terror. All these the forever wars that America's been fighting without any kind of clear objectives or endpoints, and also with COVID. Whatever you think about that, phrases like we started with phrases like social distancing and lockdown, which initially were somewhat descriptive, but you see how they were used repeatedly by officials, and to the extent that it really obscured the drastic implications of all that enforced isolation and restrictions on personal freedom. I remember the phrase flattening the curve. Got to flatten the curve. That was used to justify all the extended emergency powers, the economic shutdowns, often without any kind of transparent criteria for success or any kind of endpoints, flattening the curve. We're totally, remember how everything was for safety and health, and science became such a loaded term. Follow the science. Perfect way to deflect criticism and shut down debate by saying just follow the science, even when policies were based on extremely uncertain or let's say evolving data. I've said this before. Listeners, if they've heard this, forgive me for saying it again, but we're living in an era in which you're seeing all around you centralized digital control over populations, and it's coordinated. This is not just one nation. You can see there's obvious centralized global coordination of many nations to digitally monitor, minority report, as it were, their populations for a kind of soft version of totalitarianism. It's an environment in which you are not supposed to believe in conspiracy theories. That's considered definitely out. And so to acknowledge the true depths of a genuine UFO conspiracy, the mother of all conspiracy theories, what is bigger than the UFO conspiracy? You got JFK, you got 9/11, you got COVID, and there's aliens. I might think the UFO is the biggest of them all. So for a government agency or a president of the United States to go out and say, well, we don't want you to believe in conspiracy theories, except, well, the UFO one, yeah, that's true, but none of the others. Like, that's not a good place for them to be in. So we're at a place where the tendencies of the modern world that we've created, I think, are strongly mitigating against open public discussion on this, that will take it to a place of genuine truth. So it's a real problem. Like, we're in a situation where we've had 30 plus years of internet. We're kind of used to being good researchers. The internet's made people far better at research than we ever were before the 1990s. So there's that. But at the same time, you can see over the past quarter of a century, at least, governments have seen this and they don't like it. They don't like that. So we've seen a kind of reaction against the freedoms of the web, toward this attempt to control narratives. The system that has grown around the UFO secret over the last essentially 80 years is so deeply entrenched. It is so broadly illegal, and we can even say probably criminal, has involved so many powerful players at this point, and at this point involves very likely a great amount of money, because technology is money. So all of that, to expose that at this late date is going to be disruptive. There's just no way to get around that. You can try to spread this out over a period of decades. I'm sure that there are people who want exactly to do that. But I'm personally, you may have your own opinion on this, but I'm personally skeptical that it will be easy to stretch this out in such a way that it's a nice, gentle landing. I don't see that. We're basically going from natural human to artificial human. And that, by the way, terrifies me personally. But who cares what I think? Doesn't matter what I think. It's happening. We've already been creating an artificial environment for many, many, many generations. You know, we live in artificial homes and houses. We don't live under the skies. We like to control our environment. So we've had some practice at this, but we're now going to a point where we're going into virtual reality, augmented reality. Like, what is even going to be real? A society of total digital surveillance and monitoring and control, essentially a totalitarian system in which there's not going to be any privacy forever. How is that going to change human psychology? Probably quite dramatically. We're going through just a fundamental transformation that, again, I would also say was probably predictable. Probably. I hate to say that because it makes it sound inevitable, but, you know, that's what I think. And so they know this. And do they have an interest in managing that process? I'm sure some of them would. So I do believe that there's been a kind of, here's where we go off into the deep end, but I'm just going to say this. Has there been the possibility of an infiltration by some of them into our world? I think the answer is yes. Has to be considered as possible. You'd be a fool to pretend that it's impossible. And so then what you look for is, what evidence could be used to support this? And the only evidence that I could use to support it is the research of various UFO researchers who have developed and collected their own stories of interaction with human-looking non-humans. There's a lot of those. I've encountered a few of them myself from people. They're quite compelling. I do think that there's an element. She said I was mesmerized by them. I couldn't take my eyes off them. And they seemed like they didn't quite fit in. And then she said to me, and that's when I could hear them in my mind. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I could hear them thinking to each other. They weren't talking. I could hear them thinking. I said, well, what were they thinking? She said, well, it was kind of like one was saying to the other, well, we appear to be fitting in pretty well here. And then the other one said, yes, except for the girl behind us who can hear us. This is what she said to me. And I'll pause and I'll just say, this woman was eminently believable to me. It's absolutely credible. So to continue, she hears this telepathically, I guess. And she was kind of shocked. Who wouldn't be? And she said, at that point, though, I didn't hear anything else from them. So it was as if they knew this security breach and they shut it down. So they go through the rest of church. This is a Catholic mass, by the way. And she was almost amused by the fact that they didn't seem to know how to act within a Catholic mass. I grew up going to Catholic mass. So sit, kneel, do the sign of the cross, you get up, you do all these different things, all these motions. They were looking around to try to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, mass ends finally, and she's fascinated by them, of course. And they get up and they're out of the church immediately. They jump ahead of the crowd and they're gone. And she gets into her mind that she is going to follow them. So her mother was sitting next to her, oblivious to the whole scenario. The young woman who's telling me the story gets up and she works her way through the crowd. Her mother is yelling, "Get back here, young lady. Where do you think you're going? What are you doing? What's going on?" And the girl just goes. So she gets to the front of the church and she sees the couple. And they've walked across this big parking lot and they're going over this little crest of a hill. And she scoots across the parking lot. She gets to the top of the hill. She sees them. They're walking down this field toward a wooded area. And she starts down after them. And then she stops dead in her tracks because she sees a third person. What's that all about? So what are these people? Who are they? Are they just regular human beings who've just got gnarly powers and they can get inside your head? Well, maybe. Or maybe there's something else going on. Maybe there's a faction of beings that are just very quietly hanging out here for whatever purpose. I tend to think that that is true. I don't think they all look human. I think that there are definitely beings that do not look human. And I think that as far as what's the general scenario, I've been taking a long time to get to that, and I apologize. But I think that we are, and our planet, are subject of great, great interest right now. I do think there's probably a lot of life in the universe, but I still maintain I think planets like our own are quite special and unique and not a dime a dozen. And when we don't just have life here, we have complex, incredible life that's everywhere. We are exploding with all kinds of genetic diversity. So that's got to be of interest. And then where we are as a species are of interest. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from another planet or another dimension? Are they physical or are they spiritual? I'm going to say I think that they are physical. They may have an ability to manipulate what we would consider dimensions. And I think that's where the interdimensional aspect probably comes in. I don't know that I would call them the ones who are landing in craft, the ones who are entering oceans or coming out of oceans or coming in from an altitude of 200,000 feet down to land on the ground, tracked on radar. I don't think that they're spiritual entities. I think they're physical. And they come from somewhere. I assume they come from another world. That they're quite advanced. And figuring out the agenda is really very, very important. Are they benign or are they malevolent? I think it's a real fallacy to say that a species that is inherently much more technologically advanced is inherently more ethical than ours. I mean, a lot of the New Age community, I think, seems to believe this, that these ETs are all ethical, and it's really pretty simple. There's a lot of naivete in our society about this. Now, I'm not saying that these other aliens haven't figured out a way to manage their society in a way that they can prevent themselves from destroying themselves. They probably do that through some form of totalitarian control, though. Hive mind, that seems to me the most logical way that they would do it. You have to control. But, I mean, look, if they come from another planet, you have to assume a few things. That they, like us, became the apex predators of their world. They would have forward-facing, binocular predatory vision. They are used to manipulating the environment. They were, to get to the point of being the top species on their planet, that meant that they had to subjugate other species to do their work for them, which is what we do. We subjugate plants, we subjugate animals, we make them work for us. We take it all for granted, but we wouldn't be able to do what we do without controlling all the other species of the planet. And so they must have done the same thing. And they must have gone through a period of extreme violence to do so, which is what we've done. We've only succeeded because we're violent. That's what they must have done. Now, maybe they're not as outwardly violent anymore, but that doesn't mean they're not used to getting their own way. I'm sure they're used to getting their own way because they're quite good at it. And so they're here now. So what does that mean? Well, they're used to getting their own way. Now, they may support our development. They may have problems with our development. They may understand many, many things that we have not even begun to understand. I'm sure that's true. But does that mean inherently that they have what we would say are our best interests at heart? I don't know that for an instant. I don't know that for an instant. I have to assume they have, as long as they have physical bodies, as long as they need to eat food and have a shelter and reproduce, then I have to assume that they have their own interests. And those interests might coincide with ours to a certain extent, or they may diverge from ours to a certain extent. Just like any intelligent species would have divergent interests. But you've got a very small group of people, maybe with collaborators, who knows, who are convinced that they have to corral the world into a certain direction, one of total control. And the only way to do that is you're not going to do this by persuading people that this is how it has to be. You've got to frighten people. You have to terrify them. I have got to find a way in my life to put up a wall. I have to do this at times. Like, for example, I don't really engage in social media any longer. Other than YouTube, I will look at YouTube comments. I have people who run my social media. And there's no other way I could not survive. Well, I started in this field about 30 years ago, 31, 32 years ago. It was very early 90s. And at that time, I was, I didn't believe in grand conspiracies. I believed in little conspiracies. I believed in corruption. I knew there was a lot of corruption going on in the world. But I don't know that I was persuaded that there is an overarching level of global control that existed. And I see now that was really my own ignorance and my own naivete, but I was of that opinion because I had been indoctrinated in that belief set through my own graduate program in history, where that kind of thinking is hammered into you. There are no grand conspiracies. Historians absolutely are trained not to believe in those types of things. And so that was me. So I was in that place. In terms of the phenomenon itself, oh my God, I started out very, very conservatively. In fact, I didn't even want to study weird. I used to actually jokingly say, but truthfully, I said, well, I'll study UFOs, but I don't want to study the weird stuff like crop circles or abductions. I did not want to get into abductions. I did not want to get into the really out there, like even remote viewing. All of that seemed too far out for me. I wanted to be very, very ultra conservative in how I approached this subject. But the problem with that was I liken it to going to the ocean. You're at the beach and you put your big toe in the water and you say, that's it. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going back to the beach now. I'm not going into the water. Like, that's kind of silly. The UFO subject is an ocean. It is an ocean. And at some point you have to make the decision to go swim into the deeper areas. And that includes all of the weird things that actually go along with the subject. So I explored remote viewing early on, long before I met my remote viewing wife. Abductions, I've taken more and more seriously. I have no problem believing that now, that's for sure. And, it's weird because, there's always the danger of just believing everything. And I don't believe everything, but I believe a lot more than I used to, that is for sure. So my resistance has been broken down to a lot of the things where I kept up a pretty strong wall for a while. In terms of people who believe that they've had contact, for example, I used to not really take that very seriously in my early years. And I do think a lot of folks who, talk about contact are simply seeking publicity, and they're not necessarily stable. I do believe that, but I think there's some, I'm inclined to believe. So I think our world is much, much stranger than I did 30 years ago and 20 years ago. In my current study of over 600 USO cases that I've collected and gone into, and that I will be publishing later this year, about 6% of them involve either a case of missing time for the witness or a sighting of beings operating craft. Can say, regarding cases of missing time or sightings of beings, you can say that you don't believe such claims because I imagine for some of you, they don't have an official government or scientific seal of approval. I do know that there are researchers who feel that way. And unless it came out from FOIA, they don't want to know about it. Or unless it's been officially sanctioned, they don't want to know about it. The information did not come from our authorities. Well, I understand that up to a point. But my question to those skeptics would be, can you not look at the data with your own mind, with your own eyes, your own ears? Can you not simply use your own mind to think for yourself here and to recognize that the institutional structures that are so intent on being the authoritative sources for everything, that perhaps those institutions have their own agendas